Good morning. The experience of being able to travel on the New York City subway should allow New Yorkers to be able to get from point A to point B safely. The experience needs to improve. Day after day, we're hearing of these stories where people are being hurt. In some cases, they're pushed in front of onto the tracks. In others, they end up actually losing their life. These numbers are on the rise. A 15-year-old boy who ends up getting shot in recent days and killed after a fight between two people. A Green Goblin gang ending up onto the subway and attacking innocent riders. A woman in the Howard Beach subway station ends up getting attacked by somebody who had once murdered his own grandparent, violated his parole this past August, but because of the Less is More Act, the parole officer was not able to keep that person detained. The woman is now battling for her eyesight. She might not recover her vision. There was a period of four knife attacks in 10 hours 2 Thursdays ago. The fourth culminating in Morris Heights, where a person was stabbed to death. It was the fourth knife attack just that day over the course of that span of 10 hours. There are a lot of travelers who are fearing for their safety on the subway. There are people who have changed their behavior. They don't travel the same times of the day that they used to travel. Some people may be Jewish and they take off their yarmulke because they're afraid of being targeted for being Jewish. The Asian American community still mourning the loss of one of their own who was targeted with raw, violent hate. There are people who just don't ride the subway anymore because they fear for their safety. There are women who have told me stories about how when they travel the subway, they are hugging a pole or grabbing a guardrail because they fear being pushed in front of an oncoming subway car. There is an urgent need for elected officials at all levels of government to all be doing everything in your power to be able to improve the ridership experience, to improve safety, to make sure that law enforcement is more present at these sites. It's not just about doing one thing, it's about doing everything that is possible to make sure that ridership is improved. When Alvin Bragg came in, as part of his day one memo, he said that he was going to not enforce fare jumping. Aside from the economic impact for the subway, as a consequence, for example, you had a 16-year-old who was released after a violent robbery. 3 days later, he's trying to jump a fare. An officer tries to stop the 16-year-old, and the 16-year-old had a sense of entitlement that he was allowed to jump that fare because the prosecutor said so. Gets into a physical altercation with that officer, is using maneuvers on that officer where if the officer did that to the 16-year-old, there would be a lot of people who are silent right now who would be calling for that officer to be locked up. When that 16-year-old got in front of the judge, the sense of entitlement actually resulted in the 16-year-old asking the judge if he can press charges against the officer, and oh, by the way, the 16-year-old instantly got released. We need to ensure that some of the pro-criminal laws that are getting passed up in Albany are rolled back. There is a crime emergency in New York State. I have called on the governor to declare a crime emergency in New York. I have pledged that on day one, I will declare a crime emergency in New York. Some of these laws I cited, Less is More, the HALT Act, cashless bail, some of the discovery law changes, raise the age. There is rising crime on our streets and in our subways, and people who are in charge right now in Albany actually feel like they haven't passed enough pro-criminal laws. So we need to roll back these pro-criminal laws. We need to work with the state legislature to make these changes. We need district attorneys doing their jobs. We need to support our men and women in law enforcement. We need to improve lighting and cameras. We need to make sure that the people who are down there are actively utilizing the service. That's the only reason to be down there, to get from point A to point B. If you are not in the process of using the service that you paid for, to get from point A to point B, then you need to be removed. You don't belong there. This isn't about what's the one thing that I just mentioned that we're going to do to fix this. It's about doing all of it. Where's the city council members who are advocating against law enforcement one day and then silent on a day like today? There's a council member who represents an area not too far from here. Loves to champion attacks on law enforcement. And actually, I understand that there's some irony, there's some hypocrisy, there's some double standard in it. She needs to do the right thing. And other elected officials just need to do the right thing and work with law enforcement, work with the community, work with riders. The answer to improve and increase the amount of people who are riding the subway is not to punitively punish people who are driving a vehicle and enacting congestion pricing. The answer is to get more money to the MTA by making sure people are paying their fares, a number that has gone from 3% estimated in 2018 to 12% estimated now. That is a massive increase. And to get more people riding the service because they feel safe on it to improve the ridership experience. My running mate, our state's next lieutenant governor, is Allison Esposito. Allison retired from the NYPD after nearly 25 years of service. She was the commanding officer of the 70th Precinct most recently in Brooklyn. She is a subject matter expert who would be an important voice and leader in this effort to restore public safety and law and order, to support our men and women in blue, to make sure that law-abiding New Yorkers are back in control of our streets and our subways again. I'm honored that Allison accepted this responsibility to sign on to be my running mate, to be our state's next lieutenant governor. She will be heading up efforts as part of our administration to fix this as quickly as possible. And without any further ado, I'd like to call up Allison Esposito to say a few words. Allison.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everyone. We are in a crime crisis. We are. Plain and simple. Last night, I rode the subway to go to dinner. I'm a New Yorker. I ride the subway. There is a different feel. There's a different look in people's eyes. You can see them actually shying away from the edge of the tracks, hovering around the wall. People aren't even on their phones. They're looking around, wondering if I'm next. We are in an upside-down world right now, where criminals are not held accountable for their actions. Just look at the subway crimes year to date. We're up in New York City, just the subway felonies, just the major felonies, up over 41%. That's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of crimes. That's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of victims. And we have elected officials in Albany that are concentrated on the wrong things. They are concentrated on congestion pricing and taking more money out of our hard-working New Yorkers' pockets. They're concentrated on calling prisoners incarcerated individuals because we're more worried about their feelings than they are the decent, hard-working New Yorkers who have become victims to these prisoners. They're concentrated on banning all natural gas hookups and new construction going forward in New York State, rather than holding criminals accountable for their actions. We have elected officials now that are failing New Yorkers, plain and simple, and we have called on Governor Hochul over and over again to stand up for the good, decent, hard-working New Yorkers, and she has failed. We have called on Governor Hochul over and over and over again to debate Congressman Zeldin, to put forth to New Yorkers what she will do if elected, what her policies are if elected, and she has stayed quiet. She has stayed mum. So I call on her counterpart, Antonio Delgado, her lieutenant governor. Will you debate me? Will you stand there and stand on the whatever side of the issues you are? Because you're on the wrong side of the issues if you're on Hochul's side of the issues. Will you stand there and debate me? She was silent or complicit throughout Cuomo, throughout the whole administration, whether it was the self-congratulatory book deal or whether it was the deadly nursing home scandal. Silent or complicit. Delgado, where are you? Where are you on this? Who is going to stand up for the good, hardworking, decent New Yorkers? Who is going to hold criminals accountable for their actions? We are in a crime emergency, and people are afraid. People come to me day in and day out saying, we gave it back. It looks like the 70s again. I won't let my kids play in the park. I worked 25 years of my life to clean up this city and give it back to the good, hard-working New Yorkers. To have it be a thriving metropolis, a beacon of tourism. And now people are afraid to visit. And we are losing money through the MTA, and she has to make up for it by congestion pricing. So again, we're going to hit the good, hard-working New Yorkers. This is unacceptable, and it needs to stop. On November 8th, the people of New York need to stand up. They need to come out, and they need to elect a team that will stand behind New Yorkers, that will stand against criminals, that will back the blue and hold criminals accountable for their actions. That's where we are right now. We're in a society where criminals are not held accountable for their actions, and New Yorkers are paying for it with their lives. A 25-year all-time high in homicides in our subways. Come out and vote November 8th. Stand with us to save this state. New Yorkers are paying with their lives. Thank you.
Happy to answer any questions.
Congressman, what's your guidance to those who need to take the subways? It is the lifeblood of the city. They are, of course, entitled to a safe experience, but do you advise they be more careful? Not take the subway?
So we defer to the NYPD, which is the greatest law enforcement organization in the entire world. And the NYPD, through good times and bad times, would be encouraging riders to say something, to make sure that you're being aware of your surroundings, to make sure that you're taking precautions, to communicate with law enforcement if you see something suspicious. We don't want to discourage people from being able to just live their lives. We're here today to do our part to ensure that people are able to live their life, that they're able to get from point A to point B safely. We're not here today discouraging any New Yorker from being able to ride the subway, to walk the streets, to ride a car. Don't want to discourage anybody from coming to New York. But what we are here encouraging is that the people who are in elected office get their crap together, to stop targeting law-abiding New Yorkers, to stop missing out on opportunities to lead. We're encouraging people who are in government to do their jobs. We're not here to discourage any type of behavior of normal, law-abiding, average New Yorkers. We want everyone to live their life peacefully and normally. But the people who are in charge are failing. They're failing the people who are walking by us right now. They're crying out. For those who are elected leaders from the lowest level, whether you're the New York City Council person, whether you're the governor of the state of New York, and absolutely anyone in between. But what should the average rider do? As far as tactics, I would defer to what the NYPD continues to say with their subject matter expertise, as far as to who to call, who to communicate with, but I'll tell you what, a lot of people are telling me that they're keeping their head on a swivel more than ever before. The people are walking these streets in a way like they're in a combat zone. You're always needing to see everything that is all around you. And we just all have to do our part to make sure this doesn't turn into a combat zone.
Councilman, this is the second fatal track shove in a couple days. Should the MTA install glass barriers, and what should be done about track safety specifically?
So this is where the MTA needs to put options out right now as far as what they plan on doing. There's a reason why the MTA has long operated as its own independent authority. It doesn't get the directives from the elected officials telling them all of these different options and which one has to be done. As far as the cost of being able to implement this at every single station, honestly, I as governor would need a price tag. There needs to be a plan of how you're going to pay for it. That is a very expensive proposition. I've heard plans in the past. For whatever reason, the MTA has decided not to do it. Is it cost? I don't know. I'd like to hear that. I've heard plans through the years where someone is proposing to put up that increased security and then sell advertising space on it to help pay for the cost. Sounds creative. But again, this is a product of me talking to the MTA, laying out all of the options where you need to understand the costs, but clearly more has to be done to protect safety. Absolutely.
You said you would declare on day one a state of emergency or crisis. What exactly does that mean?
So one step is declaring a crime emergency in New York, and then with that authority, suspending cashless bail and some other laws. The suspension is for a 30-day period. It forces the legislature to the table. The 5 laws that I have mentioned, cashless bail, less is more, raise the age, the HALT Act, and the discovery law changes. I want to work with the legislature. This isn't a repeal unilaterally of these laws. It's a suspension. And what I want to do in good faith, and I believe it's the will of the people, is that regardless, Assembly, Senate, regardless, Republican, Democrat, it's our job to work together to fix these laws that clearly are failing.
Does that include asking the federal government for money at all to implement some of these changes?
The crime emergency wouldn't be. The crime emergency, day one, would come with a suspension of these 5 laws, and honestly, this is a responsibility that can't always just get punted towards asking Congress for more money. And the way the MTA operates, they put their hand out, they tell the federal government, if you give us billions of dollars, all of our troubles go away. Then they get billions of dollars. And then they come back the next day and they say, federal government, if you give me billions of more dollars, all of our troubles will go away. The federal government then gives billions of dollars. You know what the MTA says the next day? If you give us billions of more dollars, all of our problems will go away. So the MTA also has to work on leadership internally. There is a huge advantage to the MTA when you are collecting fares. There's a huge advantage to the MTA when more people are riding the service. And that is the far better answer than the enactment of congestion pricing. And I would also point out, by the way, that the estimates with congestion pricing are off. Because if they move forward with congestion pricing as they have been, it is a certainty that there will be exemptions. They'll be getting passed around like candy. There is a 0% chance that the amount of money that the MTA claims that they'll be receiving is actually going to be the number that they end up getting. But to the point of your question, as far as asking the federal government for more money, the MTA, elected officials, riders, the community, we have to stop looking at this as the end-all, be-all is just waiting for a next bailout from the federal government. There's so much more that comes with improving this ridership experience and managing the finances of the MTA.
Congressman, the mayor has suggested installing some kind of weapons screening devices that firearms at stations. Is that something you or your running mate would support?
Listen, I'd be happy to talk and work with the mayor on absolutely anything. Okay, the reality is, like earlier, we asked a question about what advice we would have to travelers. My first thought is to work with the NYPD. What do they recommend? What else can a rider do who needs to ride the subway to get from point A to point B, the NYPD are the best of the best of the best. Asked the question as far as ways that the MTA can improve safety. The first step is going to the MTA and saying, what are all the options? Because they constantly get solicited with ideas. We don't even know all the different options that they're being offered. We need to find out. And we need to find out costs and reality, how it plays out, because if you think about all the subway stations and all the ways to get onto a subway, I would imagine that that ticket is going to be massive. What's a possibility, by the way, as a follow-up to that point, on that prior question is, maybe you decide to do it at particular stations. But you have to talk to the MTA first. If the mayor has ideas, I want to know every single idea that the mayor has. In some respects, he might just be able to move forward with his own ideas, regardless of whether or not he needs something from Albany. In other respects, maybe he has to work with Albany. I want to know everything that Mayor Adams, working with the police commissioner and all the subject matter experts, believe is necessary to improve safety.
The most recent Siena College.
Oh, can I add one other thing too, by the way? And by the way, you have to understand that the attacks that are taking place are including people who are getting pushed onto a subway car. The person who died here yesterday, there was no gun that murdered him. It was that he got into a fight. The reporting is that there was a fight, a subway ends up on the tracks, the fight resulting in the victim on the tracks, and he gets killed by a subway. We were just yesterday in the Bronx, where someone got pushed got pushed onto the subway tracks. There was the 4 knife attacks in 10 hours that I referenced earlier. Those were knives that were involved. I referenced Michelle Go earlier, the member of the Asian American community, pushed in front of an oncoming subway car. Raw, violent hate was pushed. The Green Goblin gang, they didn't show up with guns, and they were attacking innocent victims. So the conversation with the mayor, the police commissioner, the MTA, the NYPD, with everybody, really has to understand that the issue that we're hearing about from riders is involving a whole bunch of other dynamics beyond just that element related to firearms. Yes?
The most recent Siena College poll results show that statewide, the gap between you and Governor Hochul has tightened to 11 points. But here in the city, you still trail her 23 to 70. This is your second day in New York City in the 5 boroughs. Is your approach to short support here as opposed to campaigning elsewhere in the state where you're in a stronger position?
So I got in this race a little over 18 months ago. The first 6 months of the campaign, we had campaigned at least twice in every county in the entire state. We have been campaigning all over the state since April 8th of 2021. Over the course of the rest of the campaign, we'll be campaigning all throughout the state. I find myself in this city almost every day. I believe that it's very important to talk to everybody. I'll meet with anybody. I'll go to any community. There's nowhere not to go. When we were together in Morris Heights a couple of Fridays ago, right after that fatal knife attack, there was a guy at the press conference, similar to a group like this, and I went up to him and I said, hello, thanks for coming, what's on your mind? It seemed like he had something on his mind. And he said in that area, they've given up on the government helping. He says that if you want to fight me, just let me know when and where. You bring your knife, I'll bring my knife, and we'll just settle it amongst ourselves. And I didn't think that he was exaggerating at all. It came across as somebody who I think has actually done it a few times. He seemed like a pretty hardened guy who has essentially given up. The streets have been surrendered. That makes me want to go to these areas even more. There are other people in government who say, okay, well, you know what, stay away from there. But that's the whole reason why you've reached that point where they feel like the streets are surrendered, is because elected officials aren't stepping up, showing up, and leading. And there are a lot of places inside of the city where you don't see Kathy Hochul, where you wouldn't see her. She'll fly over it, she'll drive past it, she'll ride around it, but you're not going to find her outside of the subway station on Morris Heights after a knife attack the night before, she's not going to be talking to that guy. You know, we're here in Jackson Heights. By the way, where's all the other elected officials, especially the elected officials who attack law enforcement? Stop, excuse me, stop grandstanding. Stop trying to just, pander to some people who want to handcuff the justice system instead of handcuffing criminals. They all should be out here. They're losing their own constituents. As far as the entire state goes, we'll continue traveling all across the state. And as far as what we're tracking internally, we've been in the low 30s. There was a Doug Schoen poll. He's a Democratic pollster. He came out with this poll just before the weekend. He said it was a 6-point race. He had us in the low 30s. That's what we're tracking. There's a big enthusiasm gap. And the one thing that I would say for members of the media who analyze a poll, the one thing that I would point out whenever looking at these smaller subsamples is that when you do a statewide poll, before you put it out, you want to make sure you have the right amount of Republicans and Democrats and independents. You might look at the age breakdown, the gender breakdown, the geographic breakdown. But that doesn't mean that within that smaller subsample, that the subsample itself is broken down correctly. It doesn't mean that in the New York City subsample that they have it broken down correctly between Republicans and Democrats and independents. It doesn't mean that they, excuse me, it doesn't mean that they polled Staten Island the same way that they polled Bronx or Manhattan. How many calls were made into Brighton Beach and Bay Ridge and Middle Village, versus some of the other areas of the city that they could have polled. So I would just say to members of the media analyzing the poll when it goes to the smaller subsects is just understanding that those areas aren't all individually broken down to be their own accurate poll itself. It's just when you're doing the poll, you collect statewide, and you just try to make sure that you have enough answers from New York City, and then you use all of your answers to try to get the right poll with the methodology statewide. Yes.
Real quick, Congressman, together with Mr. Esposito, what's your hard and fast message to criminals should they become?
Well, they're not in charge of any New York street anymore. Starting the first moment, the first day, the culture in this state changes. Law enforcement will be able to know whether it's morale, whether it's tools, resources. They have a governor who has their backs. Law-abiding New Yorkers will be able to walk 15 blocks in Manhattan again, rather than having to call an Uber to go 2 blocks. And by the way, there's a lot of attention to what happens inside of New York City, but you have a mother of 3 who a week and a half ago was murdered in front of her 3 kids by her husband, released the day before after a slew of domestic violence charges, was released because the judge did not have discretion to weigh dangerousness. A change that, by the way, Mayor Adams has been calling for, and I agree upon. Had to release the guy. The mother saying, the wife is saying, he's going to kill me. The next day, he killed her. She was wearing a bulletproof vest. We saw the story of the Long Island dad who was up in Marist, getting a cup of coffee, checking out of a hotel for parents' weekend, ends up in the line of fire and is murdered. 2 Sundays ago, I had a drive-by gang shooting on my front yard while my 2 16-year-old girls were home. So while we pay attention to these very important public safety issues inside of New York City, inside of the 5 boroughs, we are having a conversation that is very important to others all throughout the state, because we're talking about stories that happen from Suffolk County to Erie County, and it's happened in plenty of other places, in Syracuse and Rochester and elsewhere. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.